After the successful attack on Emerald Stone, both the Chupacabra player and the League player were pretty happy with themselves, and probably spent an entirely too much time self-congratulating. But they were not resting on their laurels. They realized that a once very real possibility of a seaborne assault towards Azul Harbor was no longer in the cards for House Korbyn. So they began to reposition their forces south. They were also considering the feasibility of yet another starborne attack against House Korbyn, but more on that later. Meanwhile, the aftermath of the Battle of Emerald Stone left the two players representing House Korbyn a tad disappointed. Let's just say the players did the most facepalmiest facepalm in the history of facepalming. Once they got over their humiliating defeat, the two players then began discussing their strategy. The conversation between the players went something like this. They are nickeling and diming us. They have better maneuverability and better trained troops. In which the Korbyn player replied, but we have superior numbers and deeper pockets. Let's just bum rush them and take Azul Harbor by force. To which the player playing as Lord Grimes replied, yeah, sounds good to me. And thus, Operation Bum Rush was born and put into motion. This operation consisted of a lengthy strategic movements of repositioning their provincial guards and mech companies. The Chupacabras took notice, and they were pretty stoked that they had foreseen this. Their forces were already repositioning to hold Lambridge. They did launch another raid, which went uncontested. This earned the Chupacabras another 350 war chest points. But House Korbyn was undeterred. They were massing their forces to make a push to capture the region of Lambridge, and they weren't going to get distracted. Eventually, it became clear to the League and Chupacabra forces that House Korbyn was about to strike Mortarborne, which was a logistics hub, but the Chupacabras are firmly in the camp of the best defense is a good offense. The player decided to launch a spoiling attack, supported with artillery and VTOL spotters. The Chupacabra goal was simply to blunt the advance of House Korbyn. This is the Battle of South Mortarborne. The southern approach of Mortarborne is comprised of light industry and agriculture. The river is shallow and would not hinder the movements of mechs. All the industrial buildings have a construction factor of 4. The residential houses have a construction factor of 1, and the elevated highway and bridge has a construction factor of 4 for each section. This is a spoiling attack, which, according to military doctrine, is to attack the enemy when they are vulnerable. Well, okay, so in terms of game mechanics, our house rules do the following. For the player launching the spoiling attack, which in this case are the Chupacabras, they get 2 free movement turns prior to the deployment of the opposing force. They receive times 3 point value worth of war chest points for each enemy unit destroyed. They also receive 5 war chest points for each point of damage, armor, or structure inflicted on the enemy units. Now, the Chupacabras do not want to create a new forward position that is vulnerable to being flanked. So, similar to the hit and run mission, the Chupacabras do not want to stay on the battlefield for very long. They want to move in, hit hard, and get out. So starting in turn 5, the Chupacabras will begin to lose 40 war chest points per turn. Now for House Korbyn special rules, they automatically start with 200 war chest points. Starting in turn 1, House Korbyn forces will lose 20 war chest points per turn. However, House Korbyn earns times 5 point value of war chest points for each enemy unit destroyed, and they automatically get to claim all the salvage left on the battlefield. Here's a tip for my fellow game masters. I told my House Korbyn players that they're attacking Mortarborne, but on the day of the game, I revealed to them that their mech company has stumbled onto the enemy sooner than expected, and then I left it to them to figure out what's going on. It didn't take very long, but it's that extra little surprise that gives them that immersion into the game. Okay, let's look at the deploying forces. House Korbyn was attacking with its 4th mech company, which has 2 assault lances and 1 light striker lance. The first assault lance is comprised of an Atlas, a Night Star, an Orion, and a Blackjack. The second assault lance is comprised of a Marauder 2, an Annihilator, a Stalker, and also a Blackjack. Now the light striker lance is comprised of a Blackhawk, a Bushwhacker, a Dasher, and a Wraith. One thing to note, which is a common problem for the entire Korbyn forces, is that the mech warriors are all green, meaning they have a skill level of 5. Remember, the lower the skill number, the better the mech warrior. The Chupacabras deployed elements of their second mech company, which was a battle lance and a fire support lance. The battle lance is comprised of a cataphract, a crusader, and 2 warhammers. The fire support lance is comprised of 2 archers, a longbow, and a trebuchet, and I want to point out that all 4 of the mechs have veteran mech warriors piloting. The provisional government also deployed half a lance of 2 Balak strike VTOLs to support the spoiling attack, as well as tasked 3 fire missions from a battlefield support asset, the Thumper Artillery. The 2 VTOLs don't have any special pilot abilities, but they are both equipped with tag. Since there will be quite a few mechs on the battlefield, the players elected to use the original rules for combat in Alpha Strike instead of separating out the dice for the attacks. Alright, now that we got that out of the way, let's get into the battle. Since this is a spoiling attack, the Chupacabras are allowed 2 free turns of movement to position their forces on the battlefield before House Korbyn even deploys their forces. The battle lance sprints down the elevated highway, and in order to get control of the center of the map before House Korbyn forces can deploy. The fire support lance maneuvers into cover behind buildings and around the woods. A pair of VTOL spotters maneuver to try to get as much line of sight as they can on the battlefield. Now, let's get into turn 1. They roll for initiative, and it looks like House Korbyn wins with an 8. The Chupacabras will move first. The Chupacabras move their fire support lance further into the woods in order to get some more cover, and try to break line of sight with the enemy forces. House Korbyn elects to move their light strikers first, and maneuver down the left side of the battlefield in order to protect that flank. Next up is the Chupacabra battle lance. The 2 warhammers hop down from the overpass and try to take up positions in the woods. The cataphract and crusader, however, continue to move along the elevated highway. House Korbyn then activates their first assault lance, which moves along a small valley to hold the right side of the map. The Chupacabras then activate their 2 VTOLs, fly over the woods to get a position just at the edge of the woods so that they can get line of sight on the Korbyn Light Striker lance. Finally, the second assault lance moves forward, holding the center of the Korbyn advance. On to the shooting phase. The fire support lance, supported by the VTOL spotters, has line of sight on the Korbyn Wraith and the light strikers. Therefore, they will do an indirect fire attack. And the way to calculate the target number is a little different than others, where we have a range of +4, +3 for the Wraith's TMM, +0 for the movement modifier for our spotter, and finally +1 because this is an indirect fire attack. Therefore, the target number comes out to 8. The 2 archers miss spectacularly, but the longbow was able to score a critical hit. This takes 2 damage of armor points from the Wraith, but the critical hit was also the ammo, which unfortunately had no effect because the Wraith is an energy weapon only mech. But the trebuchet was also able to hit the Wraith, taking another point of armor from the mech. Next up is Spotter 1 VTOL, which designates the Dasher and the Light Strikers with its tag and calls in fire support from the Thumper Artillery. The target number is reduced to 6, and the Dasher is hit with an 8, which takes 1 point of armor off the Dasher. Next up is the Crusader and the 2 Warhammers in the Chupacabra battle lance, which open fire on the Blackjack from Korbyn's second assault lance. For the 2 Warhammers, the target number comes out to 9, +4 for the skill, +4 for the long range, +1 for the Blackjack's TMM. Both Warhammers missed, and therefore they used 1 of their lucky points each, and both scored a hit with a second reroll, taking 4 points of armor off the Blackjack. The Crusader now opens fire on the Blackjack with a skill of 3, long range of 4, and the Blackjack's TMM of 1 brings the target number to an 8. And the Crusader scores a hit, doing 2 damage, which finishes off the Blackjack's armor and scores 1 damage of structure to the Blackjack, which caused a critical damage roll, which was a 4. Critically damaged the Blackjack's fire control, which negatively impacts its ability to hit another enemy target. Now House Korbyn can fire back. The Dasher is the only mech with a line of sight of the enemy unit, which is the Spotter VTOL. With a skill of 5, range of 0, TMM of 4 for the spotter, and +1 since the target is a VTOL, the target number is 10, and he unfortunately missed with an 8. The entire second assault lance line up their weapons and fire at Warhammer 1. With a skill of 5, long range of 4, and the TMM of the Warhammer is 1, the target number comes out to 10, and every single mech missed. As for the first assault, only the Orion and Blackjack had line of sight on an enemy mech, which was the Crusader. With a skill of 5, range of 4, and a TMM of 1, the target number was 10, and both hit, stripping 5 points of armor off the Crusader. So for the turn 1 recap, House Korbyn moves on the battlefield with caution, not fully aware what the Chupacabras are up to. And that's when the indirect fire from the fire support lance as well as the distant artillery begins to rain down upon their mechs. The battle lance and the assault lance also exchange fire, both sides dealing damage. Now on to turn 2. And it looks like the Chupacabras lost initiative. They will need to move and shoot first. They elect to move the fire support lance first. The 2 archers and the trebuchet stand still, reducing their target number, but also reducing their target movement modifier. The longbow moved back behind a building to maintain cover and to prepare for another indirect fire attack. The Korbyn player wanted to wait to see what the VTOLs would do, so he elected to move his first assault lance up the hill and towards the highway. The Korbyn player also makes sure to space out his mechs to reduce the effect of artillery fire. The Chupacabras then move their battle lance into cover of the woods, maintaining a line of sight on the highway and bridge just in case if they need to provide covering fire. The Korbyn player, still wanting to see where the VTOLs move, elected to move the second assault lance and continue to push down the center of the map. The VTOLs wanted to make sure it could maintain line of sight on potential targets, so Spotter 1 moved to the right, maintaining 42 inches away from the heavily damaged Blackjack, so that it would still be in long range. As for the other spotter, it basically takes up the position that Spotter 1 previously held. Finally, Korbyn players saw where the VTOLs were moving and took advantage. The Dasher lost 6 inches of movement maneuvering out of the woods, but the Dasher then used the rest of its movement to close to short range with Spotter 2. The rest of the Light Striker Lance continued to push along the left side of the map. This should be an interesting shooting round, starting with the Chupacabras. The Chupacabras are determined to take out the Blackjack, and calls to adjust fire on the Blackjack. The target number is 7, but the fire mission was ineffective and harmlessly splashed down in between the Blackjack and the Marauder. The Crusader, using line of sight provided by the VTOL spotter, makes an indirect fire against the Blackjack as well, with the target number of being 10, and he also missed. Warhammer 2 also shoots at the heavily damaged Blackjack, and with a target number of 10, it shoots and despite using a lucky point, was still unable to successfully hit the Blackjack. Warhammer 1 shoots at the Dasher. With a skill of 4, range modifier of 2, TMM of the Dasher is 4, and plus 1 for the cover of the woods, the target number is 9. And despite it also using a lucky point, the Warhammer failed to hit the Dasher. The Cataphract had too much intervening woods between it and the Dasher, and therefore does not have line of sight to attack the Dasher. VTOL Spotter 1, which is hovering over the highway, opts not to fire in order to give better line of sight and better shooting opportunity to the fire support lance's indirect fire attacks. VTOL Spotter 2, on the other hand, wanted to use its tag to give line of sight to fire support lance, but since Warhammer 1 had failed to hit the Dasher, instead turns their weapons on the Dasher. The target number is still pretty high despite being a short range. Skill of 4, range modifier is 0, and the TMM for the Dasher is 4, makes the target number an 8. And he rolled an 11. The Dasher is destroyed, but it will still get a chance to shoot back during the Korbyn's shooting phase. Still wanting to get the kill on that Blackjack, the entire fire support lance engaged their indirect fire attacks against the severely damaged Blackjack. The target number for the longbow is 10, and it is a miss. Since the trebuchet and the 2 archers stood still, their target number is reduced by 1, so therefore it is a 9. Unfortunately, the 2 archers missed, but the trebuchet scores a hit, which takes another point of structure damage off the Blackjack and caused a critical damage roll, with a result of 7, causing critical damage to the movement of the Blackjack. The mech is severely damaged, but the mech warrior survived an artillery barrage, indirect fire, and dodged incoming PPC blasts from the Warhammer, which earned him the name Lucky Jack by the House Korbyn players. Now House Korbyn shoots back. The Dasher is going down after this turn, but still has one last chance to fire, and it is determined to shoot down Spotter 2. With a skill of 5, range modifier is 0, and the TMM for the spotter is 4, and plus 1 because the target is a VTOL, brings the target number ultimately to a 10. And the Dasher rolled an 11, inflicting 4 damage to the Spotter 2, which is enough to shoot it out of the sky. The VTOL destroyed the Dasher, and the Dasher destroyed the VTOL. And unfortunately, both the VTOL crew and the Dasher mech warrior failed their casualty roll, and they are both KIA. The Bushwhacker has line of sight on Warhammer 1. The target number is 9, but it missed with an 8. The Wraith and the Blackhawk don't have line of sight on any targets, and Spotter 1 is too far out of range for them to engage. However, the Stalker and Blackjack both are in range of Warhammer 1. Blackjack is severely damaged and will withdraw from the battle next turn, but it can still make attacks for this turn. The target number is 11, but they both miss with a roll of a 4 and an 8. The entire first assault lance can see Warhammer 1 as well. The Atlas, Blackjack, Marauder, and the Orion all open fire. With a skill of 5, range modifier of 4, the TMM for the Warhammer is 1, and it also has cover, so another +1, makes the target number 10, and unfortunately every single shot misses. Turn 2 saw that Lucky Blackjack dodged most of the incoming fire. It survived, but it will need to withdraw. The Dasher and VTOL both destroy one another at short range. This earned the Chupacabra 93 war chest points, but House Korbyn earned 170 war chest points. But both sides lost their crews, which could have a long-term effect, especially for the League forces. And now we're in turn 3, and it looks like the Chupacabras win initiative. House Korbyn will need to move and shoot first. Korbyn player, realizing the intent of the Chupacabras is to continue to attempt to pummel his mechs with indirect fire, so he elects to activate his first assault lance and push on the right side. His intent is to get enfilade fire on the enemy. The Chupacabras activate their fire support lance and begin their maneuvers to withdraw from the battlefield. The Korbyn player activates their second assault lance. The heavily damaged Blackjack, or Lucky Jack, sprinted to the rear. The player didn't want to risk losing another mech. Besides, Lucky Jack had damaged weapons and was only moving at half speed. The rest of the assault lance continued to push down the center of the map. Next up for the Chupacabras was her VTOL, which she wanted to keep at long range of the Korbyn mechs but maintain line of sight for the indirect fire attacks. Next for the Korbyn player was the Light Striker Lance. They wanted to try to pin down the Chupacabra mechs. However, they haven't seen where the battle lance of the Chupacabras was going to move, and they didn't want to get into a straight up firefight with the assault lances still so far behind. So instead, they opted to stay in as much cover as possible, but still advance on the left and be ready to support by fire the assault lance attack down the center of the map. And finally, the Chupacabras activate their battle lance. The Korbyn player suspected the battle lance was not going to move forward, and instead will seek out cover and retreat with the fire lance, and he was right. The Cataphract sprints past the fire lance in order to be in position for the next turn, so it can cover the left flank. As for the rest of the battle lance, they decided that the right flank is folding, and instead would use the woods to screen their maneuvers to the left, and try to get shots off against the Light Striker Lance if it advances towards them. On to the shooting phase. For a very long time, the Korbyn player considered to shoot down the VTOL, but ultimately decided against it since the Orion and Blackjack were the only mechs in range, and he knew his pylons weren't the best shots. So he decided to pour all his shots into the Warhammer 1, the good old purple hammer. The Orion was at medium range, but the Night Star, Blackjack, and the Stalker were at long range. Therefore, the target number for the Orion was 9, and he missed with a 6. And the target number for the Blackjack, Night Star, and Stalker is 11. And unfortunately, the Blackjack and the Night Star missed with a 5 and an 8. However, the Stalker hits the Warhammer with an 11, stripping 2 points of armor off. Next up is the Wraith and the Light Striker Lance, who also fires at Purple Hammer. The Wraith is at medium range, and therefore the target number is 9, who hits with an 11, taking 3 more points of armor for the Warhammer, which has no armor left. Next is the Blackhawk, who has his sights on the Warhammer as well. He is also at medium range with a target number of 9, but he misses with a 7. The rest of House Korbyn forces either don't have line of sight or are too far out of range. Onto the Chupacabras shooting. The VTOL spotter has line of sight on both the Wraith and the Blackhawk. Unfortunately, the Lucky Jack was too far out of range for the VTOL, and the Chupacabra player was more concerned about the closing Korbyn forces. Since the Blackhawk is very deadly at short to medium range, the VTOL calls in the last of its artillery strikes against the Blackhawk. The target number for the Thumb artillery is 7, and it's a critical hit. A roll for the critical hit, and it's an 8. Weapon destroyed, reducing its damage by 1. Sensing blood in the water, the spotter directs all the indirect fire from the fire support lance and the Crusader to attack the Blackhawk. The Crusader, Trebuchet, and one of the archers are at medium range, so their target number is 5. And all 3 hit, destroying the Blackhawk's armor. And that leaves the archer and the longbow, each with an indirect fire. Their target number is 7. And they both hit, causing 4 damage, which is enough to destroy the Blackhawk, which was completely destroyed by indirect fire. The Warhammer lines up its sights against the Wraith, and despite the target number being 10 and using a lucky point, it still missed its shot. No other Chupacabra mech has any valid shots left, so that brings turn 3 to a close. At this point, the battle basically turned into an all-out withdrawal for the Chupacabras. which took 2 turns, and neither side were able to get line of sight in order to fire at one another. All the fire missions were spent, and the Chupacabras knew that they were on the clock. In fact, the Korbyn player sort of allowed the Chupacabras to escape because he didn't want to risk any more of his badly damaged mechs to get shot apart. So how'd they do? The Chupacabras were able to destroy the Dasher and the Blackhawk, earning 207 war chest points. They delayed House Korbyn's forces for 5 turns, but they were on the battlefield too long and received a penalty in war chest points. The Chupacabras inflicted a total of 13 points of damage to the enemy's armor and 3 points of damage to the enemy's structure, earning 80 war chest points. So they earned a grand total of 287 war chest points from this battle. However, to deploy to this battle costed 100 war chest points, and to rearm and refit will cost an additional 95 war chest points, which the player said she would pay. Add in the penalty for 1 turn delay, and the cost was 235 war chest points. So ultimately, the Chupacabras profited 52 war chest points. And they lost a VTOL. And more importantly, the crew was lost. As for House Korbyn, he earned 170 war chest points for destroying the VTOL. And despite the 5 turns of penalties, he earned another 100 war chest points, for a grand total of 270 war chest points. He also gets to claim all the salvage from the battlefield, which doesn't give the player immediate benefit, but he does have some time to consider what to do with the salvage. For the Korbyn player, the cost to rearm and refit is 165 war chest points, so ultimately the Korbyn player gained 105 war chest points. But he lost 2 mechs and both mech warriors were KIA. But as the Korbyn player stated, they can absorb the tragic losses, the League forces cannot. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment below. If you want to see more videos and battle reports from BattleTech and historicals and fantasy, please subscribe to the channel. And if you want to help the channel grow, check out our Patreon page and see if there's anything there that might interest you. Okay, Wargamers, I'll see you next time.